my name is Carol May Whittick, spiritual life coach and your host of Her Conversations, Tools for the Awakening. Her is an acronym for Higher Energetic Resonance. This is the optimal state to embody in order to attract our highest desires. What is the awakening? This is the moment in time when humanity rises up out of the darkness. Who is awakening? Each one of us present on earth today, reclaiming our sovereignty, seeking greater possibilities in our reality and looking for solutions. We know being awakened is not a lofty ideal but a necessity. If we can transform ourselves, we can change the world. Guests on Her Conversations will speak to your spirituality, sensuality and soul. Listen to their stories and hear how they are in service to the world. Let their words and these conversations embolden and inspire you. Before we go into this episode, let me just share with you ways that I can support you in your awakening. First, you can listen to Her Inspirations, the sister podcast to Her Conversations, where each week I'll be going through different aspects of our own spiritual awakening and personal growth journey. In addition to that, you can join the mailing list to receive emails with additional teaching points so that you can explore deeper when you're going through your own personal inquiry. If you're someone that's always wanted to be heard in the world, whether that means you're launching your own podcast, putting yourself out there online, public speaking, or simply showing up in your life, I've created Your Awakened Voice for you. This is my self-led course that uses my holistic approach, which acknowledges the intricate connection between your physical body, mind, and spirit. This course will empower you to discover and develop your voice. Or you may choose to work with me on a one-on-one basis, and this is for you conscious creators. If you know that there's a purpose to your life, my purpose is to support you confidently to follow your intuition and create your big vision. All of the links to these are in the show notes below. This week's guest is Julie Zaruba Fountaine. She is the founder of Empower Possible LLC. Her decade-long mission is to empower individuals, organizations, and communities through positive change. She's a certified change management specialist who has crafted a comprehensive well-being solution that includes self-development, social networking, and systems transformation. During our conversation, Julie shares how her personal experience of navigating the challenges of burnout inspired Empower Possible and provides insights and practical tools that empower individuals on their path of awakening. So, as always, I begin by asking my guest. HER is an acronym for Higher Energetic Resonance. When do you feel that higher energetic resonance?
What comes to mind with higher energetic resonance is that feeling of awe and inspiration. And there's a few times that I feel it. I live on the shores of Lake Superior. And so when I'm out in nature, watching the waves roll in the lake, and then also I feel the high energetic resonance when I'm with my nieces and nephews and looking at the world through a child's eyes and the moments of awe that just come up throughout the day of being with them. So nature and then the children's view of the world are those two moments in my life that it comes up pretty consistently.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thanks for that, Julie. And before we get into the conversation deeper, can you just share a little bit about your journey, how you got to be doing the work that you're doing today?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have a couple of different roles in my life right now. And my full-time job, I am a well-being specialist within a regional healthcare system in the United States in the Midwest. And I also am the founder of Empower Possible, which is part of my origin story of how I came to be on this podcast. And then the third role that I have, I am an adjunct instructor, and I teach exercise adherence and foundations of well-being. And then I also teach exercise metabolism and nutrition. So you might have picked up, I'm a curious person. I like a lot of diversity in my day-to-day activities. And I came to be in this role. I didn't know what well-being was when I was in college until I went to a presentation by Daniel Buettner, who worked with National Geographic to study areas of the world that had people living to be over 100 years old. And those came to be blue zones. So now we hear a lot about the blue zones. But at the time, it was just really starting this conversation about blue zones. So I went to the presentation and I thought, how do I get to do something like that? That sounds amazing. And ended up going into graduate school, worked in corporate wellness, which again, didn't know corporate wellness existed until I started doing it. And then worked a couple of years in research and decided wanted to go back to more of a hands-on approach to well-being. Um, I support research, and it's hard sometimes seeing the goal of that research come to life. And I really wanted to be on the preventative side of well-being after being a couple of years in research studying well-being. Ended up in higher education and worked out what was my dream job, and then became burnt out. And that through that burnout process is really when I recognized that I don't want anyone to go through what I went through. And so I felt called to create the business. And that was the foundation of Empower Possible. And that brought me to where I am today.
Great. And what would you say is like the main part of your work that you seem to be doing the most of, or what has changed for you recently?
The biggest transition that I made recently is actually not letting myself be defined by my work.
Hmm.
And really recognizing that I have multiple identities. And that was the hardest part for me when I was burnt out, is that grief that I felt for who I thought I was,
Mm.
and not knowing who am I without this role. If I'm not here, if I'm not living what I thought was my dream, then what does that mean? And really, in my intellectually, I understood, okay, I'm a daughter, I'm an aunt, I'm a wife, I'm a lot of these things. But spiritually and emotionally, I felt this is my calling. This is what I am feel drawn to. And if I'm not doing that, and if that didn't work out, I just felt like I was at a loss. And it wasn't until I identified it as grieving that then I was able to process through what was happening, and I was able to let go of that identity.
Mm.
And so the biggest change for me is really allowing myself to be my whole self and show up as my whole self
Mm.
in all of the places that I am.
Mhm, mhm. And what does that feel like to you? What does that look like to you? Because I can imagine that many people have felt that kind of rub of like knowing that they're not the thing, and either they stay in the role and continue, or they get, made redundant, or something will take them out of a situation. Um, how did you start to kind of really identify and make moves towards what you felt was right for you and calling you?
Yeah. The first part was identifying that I was burnt out. So the first step is acknowledging that, and that's really hard, or acknowledging that you're heading towards burnout. Like, hopefully you won't get to that point where I was completely burnt out. But recognizing the change in mood, recognizing change in sleep patterns. Maybe you're using alcohol or drugs or food or relationships and becoming codependent on those things, whatever that looks like for you. Maybe you feel disconnected to your work. There's lots of ways that it can show up. So first of all, is recognizing that, and then going through the human change process. So this work and experience affected me so much that I actually ended up developing a whole online course, and I have a free workbook, navigating transitions, that's based off of that process. And I felt it was important to contribute that to the world, based off of my experience and conversations with others, and then my educational background. And so what you go through in the human change process, um, is that first is that awareness building. So whatever that feels like for you. For me, it was, I told my supervisor no for the first time, and I had zero guilt about it.
Mm.
And that actually is healthy to have those workplace boundaries. And now I can have that conversation with my supervisor in a healthy way. It's a different supervisor now, but at that time, that didn't, I never felt like I was able to say no. And then at that point, when I was able to say no and have no guilt about it, that's when I knew I'm like, something is really shifting in me and I have to figure out what is going on. So that was a hint. And then I also too was really angry. I was really angry about events that had happened. And that isn't really like me either. I tend to have I'm a peacemaker. I tend to like harmony and peace. And so that quick temper just wasn't like me. So those are some things that I found in myself. So once I started having that awareness about, okay, something is really happening. This is affecting my relationships. It's affecting how I am at work. Something's going on. So I had that awareness building. And then the next piece of the human change process is the letting go.
Mm.
So letting go, for me, I had to let go of that identity of who I thought I was as a working professional. I also had to let go of the dream. I thought I was going to be working at that institution for the rest of my career.
Mm.
And that was a story that I was telling myself. And I had these old stories that supported that. And I had to let go of those stories and I had to grieve the loss of those things. And then I had to start writing new stories about an empowered future. What would that look like for me? One that's not defined by my role. It's not defined by my productivity. It's not defined by what others say about me.
Mm.
And a new story that says that I am enough.
Yeah.
And period. That's the sentence. I am enough. There's no qualifiers. So that was the new story that I had to write for myself.
Mm.
And then once you have those two things, then you can go into a visualization process of what would that look like
Mm.
to be real.
Mhm.
So for me, that meant I had to leave that institution. I could no longer be there because I had no boundaries set up. I was feeling guilty and ashamed, and I could no longer function in that workplace. And
Mm.
so I had to leave. I started my own business. I started a new role, full-time appointment. I engaged in my academic background, which I love. And I had to leave. And that meant a fresh start. That meant me visualizing this meant me thinking about new boundaries. Okay. In the workplace, in my business, what are those new boundaries going to be? How am I going to define myself? What does that look like? What's my personal mission statement?
Mhm.
And then the fourth phase is realization. So you have your visual place that you want to go, how you want to feel, what you want to be doing, who you want to work with, sights and sounds and smells. What does that look like? And then you think about what is the first step that I can take to realize that vision?
Mm.
So those four steps encompass the human change process, and that's what we go through when we're making the change, and that's what I went through. And it plays out for all of us in different ways, but those four large buckets are something that you'll go through. And I described it in a linear way, but it's
Mm.
not. It's not completely linear. You'll go back and forth and back around, and it's just easier to explain linearly than it would be to jump back and forth.
Sure. Beautiful. Thank you. So many points that I want to kind of go back on of what you said. Like the first one, that I wanted to ask a question around is so many people find it hard to say no, particularly at work. Where does that come from, do you feel, that inability to just stand up for something that you know is intrinsically against your own personality or your morals sometimes as well, where people will just kind of override those things just because they're in a work situation. Where does that obedience and that almost gaslighting of your own self come from?
Yeah. Um, for me, I'm going to borrow. So I'm a mixed models type of person. I believe in looking at different combination of theories to support what it is, my hypothesis, so to speak, in my work. So I'll borrow from a couple of different places. But one, I think I'm going to lean on Gretchen Rubin, who she talks about the four different work styles that we have. So there's a certain work style and a certain type of category that is an obliger. So
Mm.
someone that tends to, if I ask you something, your tendency is going to be to oblige to whatever it is that they're asking. And there's so many different reasons behind that: social conditioning, peer pressure, guilt, shame, um, lots of different our childhood experiences, those all play into it. But if you are someone that has that tendency of obligation, it's really important for you to be aware of that, because you're going to be motivated to then fulfill those tasks that someone delegates to you more than even the tasks that you delegate to yourself.
Mhm.
So that is it's a tendency that certain groups of people have. And the bottom line, it comes down to the social conditioning and our lived experiences.
Mm.
We've somehow benefited from that.
You spoke about awareness as well, and how can someone develop awareness? Because not everyone has that awareness, even though, like you say, it's like suddenly I'm angry and suddenly I'm eating more and suddenly I'm not behaving like myself. And you're able to go, okay, I'm not being me. Why am I not being me? And start to kind of have that conversation around what goes on. Whereas I would suspect a high majority of people will just fall into that behavior and just allow that to take over their lives and maybe never really check what's happening and why it's happening. So what brings that awareness to the fore, and how can we foster awareness if you're not a self-aware person?
Yeah, you mentioned spirituality in our conversation. So I would say, if you are someone who prays, to listen to that, have that sacred pause.
Mm.
So take that moment, 2 or 3 moments of a deep breathing, and that means, you should push out your belly when you take that breath. Most of us are breathing up in our lungs, but really expand and
Mm.
breathe in and take a full breath and then fully exhale, and do that 2 to 3 times. And just within that sacred pause, leave your mind open to feeling what you're feeling and noticing your thoughts. Not judging the thoughts, but just noticing what's coming up for you in that sacred pause. So that could be, like I said, that could be before you're taking a moment to pray. For me, that sacred pause happens when my phone dings. I like to take a couple of deep breaths before I look at the notification, regardless of what it is. And just building that into our day a few moments at a time can be really helpful, because you're absolutely right. Many of us have just been programmed, myself included. I'm a very disciplined person, and I'm programmed to just do, no matter the cost. It doesn't really matter how I'm feeling. I have a task to get done. I'm going to do it. Um, Now I'm retraining that to take those moments and say, maybe I can reorganize my day here based off of when I'm feeling most productive and when I'm feeling most creative, and then structure it that way. But it is really about taking that moment to reflect. Sometimes it means working with a therapist, or a spiritual leader. Having those conversations with a spiritual leader or a therapist can be really helpful, because they can be a outside source looking at. Sometimes it's tough to see our own patterns in our lives. We all have them, these patterns that we dive into, and that can help bring that to light. Sometimes a trusted friend can help bring that to light, someone that you can trust with your story, that won't abuse that power that they have. Can be really important, because sometimes we can't see it in ourselves, and that's just our natural bias that we have. We want to protect our ego, and so sometimes we're not able to see that. So it's about willing to say and have an open conversation with friends about, I'm feeling really frustrated, but I just don't know why, or I'm feeling a little off and I just don't know why. And talk about that with someone that you trust.
Great, great. And then you spoke about letting go of the dream. And I suppose this is like a real big one, because especially if you've invested an education, a college education, and you're still paying that off, and then suddenly you're like, I don't want to go this way. How do people find the courage to really take that when there are no guarantees? Especially you stepped off and went, oh, I'm going to start my own business, and you kind of said it like that. Um, which makes it sound really easy. And for me, I've always kind of tried to find a way of doing the thing that I've wanted to do. It's always been very clear what I've wanted to do. And even moving in and out of having employment and freelance and everything like that, there's always been a goal of, well, this is what I'm going to do. I might be doing these things, but that's where I'm going. So for me, it's never been hard to be in a situation where, if the situation within employment was starting to encroach on me personally, I'd be like, I'm going to go and literally walk out the door, because I've done that on numerous occasions when I'm like, I'm not being myself, or I'm not being respected, or I can really feel, to the point where there's been times where just walking into the building, when I'd get to a point in a job role where it was just like, I'm walking towards the building and I'm feeling my body just go into a completely different, like, we don't want to be there, you know. And as you're going there, I'm thinking of one instance as well, like the closer I got to the building, it was like my legs just got heavier. My legs just got heavier. My body just got heavier. I felt like I was going to be sick, because I knew everything that was going to happen that day, because everyone was just on a program. You know, he's going to say this, that person's going to do this, this thing's going to happen. You know, they were all, and I was just like, I can't keep doing it to myself, going through this thing. So for me, it was like, well, I'm just going to go and find a different way of doing things. And it, you know, it didn't happen overnight, but I knew that it was worth the risk of taking a dip in income to save myself. And also, I noticed, talking about self-awareness, that whenever I'm in a situation that I know isn't right for me, I get snappy, I get sarcastic, I start to get frustrated. You know, I'm trying to create drama, or I'm almost trying to like ask somebody to tell me to leave before I have to like excuse myself, you know. So I know that when I go into those, or in the instances before when I used to work in groups, in employment roles, and work for other people, when I notice myself doing those things, that it wasn't a good thing, you know. And it was rarely anyone else, because the environment's the environment, but I'm me and I can move. But not everyone has that, or not everyone has the guts to do so, because usually the first thing's like, oh, how's it going to make, you know, money always comes first, and sometimes we'll override ourselves for the sake of money. But having stepped out numerous amounts of times, there are always jobs to do in the interim that will kind of, you know, get you until the thing. But for some people, because maybe they've built up that identity, and also maybe they've got used to that check dropping in on a certain day of the month, year in, year out, even if you're not really doing anything for it, to like leave all of that behind and walk into the unknown, is like, that in itself is more scary than staying there and watching themselves, you know, disintegrate under just not being seen or heard, or living with any kind of passion. So asking those questions of, what was it within you, and what can people find to build themselves up to make that step of walking away, or if not walking away, transitioning away, so that it doesn't feel like a complete tearing of the plaster off the wound, as it were.
Yeah, absolutely. For me, I didn't feel like I had a choice, because I felt much like to your story. I felt I I'll just turn into this person I don't want to be if I stay one more second in this job. I felt so angry about the situations that had played out, and I felt like I had been misled for years about what would happen with my role. I felt like I had given every ounce of my being to ensure the success of the programs that I was offering. And to put into context what had happened, I was offered the opportunity to be the COVID-19 public health coordinator. And so I was in charge of quarantine and isolation procedures, our call center. I was like a mini public health unit at our institution. And so think about the height of the pandemic. This is where this was happening. I had set up all of these things with my team, had organized everything, and then awarded certain things outside of the organization, and recognized outside of the organization for how well things were put together, and been asked to serve on committees to help other people establish these things because of the systems that were developed. And so was receiving that outside recognition. And then internally, when I had asked for a role in doing this type of work long term, was told that it couldn't be created. And so I had spent years trying to work towards this role. I had finally had the opportunity to do the role, but then once we were shifting away from that position, was not given the opportunity to continue it because they told me that it didn't exist. Then I found out that they created the role, so and then gave it to someone else.
Mm.
So that was heartbreaking to me to find out, one, that they had been lying to me for 5 years because they said that they couldn't create the role, and then the role was created. And then two, it was given to someone else. And then three, never fully compensated for all of the hours of extra time that I had put in. And was not only compensated, but also lectured on that. Well, this was the job. You shouldn't have taken the job if you didn't want to put that time into it. Which I was working 7 days a week, 8 weeks straight, 8, 10, 12-hour days to get this set up and rolling. And so that felt like I was being unreasonable for wanting some sort of compensation for that. And once I thought, well, this is the culture here. They're willing to take your heart and soul and stomp on it. And I just didn't want to be a part of that anymore. And I couldn't be a part of that anymore. And I had colleagues that I really deeply cared about that were very supportive of me. And that's why I had stayed for so long, is because I believed in that community and I wanted that community to thrive. And there were so many people in there that I so deeply cared about. But unfortunately, it was ruined by the couple of individuals that were in positions of power that didn't lean into those values that the rest of us had. And with that clash of values, I knew that I could never survive there because it so deeply disagreed with the things that I valued so much. And so for me, once I got to that point where I recognized that awareness building of I was recognizing the clash in values, and I knew I had to go out. So it is about reflection. It's about pausing. It's about asking yourself on a regular basis, tuning into yourself and what it is that you value and how your day-to-day activities support those values. So it is a bit of reflection that I would say build into your life, and it will more the return on investment of that is going to be beyond what you can even dream of.
Right, right, right. Yeah. Interesting, you say individuals, like I'm just getting flashbacks to like individuals that I had the like interesting paths that we crossed that would never have met people like such and have put up with their nonsense if it wasn't for being in an employment situation. And it's interesting how sometimes especially if we talk about spirituality and deep inner self reflection, how oftentimes it's people who that is just not on their radar at all that end up being in positions of authority / power that then creates such a toxic work environment for people that are very heart-centered and in ways get bullied and abused. As an adult, when you're in a situation where you're bullied in a work situation where there's so much riding on that income, especially if you have a family to support, that it kind of just creates like a weird kind of chain of abuse and toxicity, like you're going there to support your family, but you're putting yourself in harm's way emotionally and psychologically to then support them and then feel trapped in that and not being able to work your way out of that as well. And I feel that may be quite a high number of people in the workforce.
When I was starting the online course Career Crossroads and developing the workbook, I had so many conversations to prepare for one, I wanted that free offering of the workbook. That was really important to me. So to prepare for the workbook and course, I had a lot of conversations, different ages, different backgrounds from different countries. And then and part of my healing process took place is I had to reflect on, well, what happened to me?
Mm.
And that process and really go through how did that align with what I know from an educational standpoint and the theories of change and recognizing that. And it's a consistent story that came up. And this happened to me, and maybe it happened to you as well. But consistently in the interviews that I had was the
Mm.
gaslighting of people within that organization saying that, well, that's not what happened. Like, I didn't say that. You didn't do that. That's not what we agreed to. That's not really happening here. Like, you're taking that the wrong way. Like, and very consistently that happened. And then people in turn gaslighting themselves, thinking, well, I'm expecting too much. I could be doing better. I am not worth that, or I'm remembering it wrong. And then that is what leads us to continuing to be in those situations because we then don't trust our own selves. And once we lose that, it is very easy for someone with bad intentions to influence us. And through that sacred pausing, through that reflection of our values, we can start to gain that back and begin to trust ourselves again, begin to trust our inner knowing, our inner wisdom, our guidance. If you believe in a higher power, begin to trust that
Mm.
again. But it can be taken away by that gaslighting that happens.
Yeah, I see so much. I work with clients who are trying to find purpose in their life, and always thinking it's this big out there thing. It's like, no, 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 it's actually very much within, like literally at the end of your notes, it's not really that far. It's kind of made to seem that grandiose, your life purpose, what is it that it is going to be, but it's everything that you've ever been through and everything that is your purpose, and there's a way of turning it, like you've done it, turning it out and turning it back, and
Mm.
also how important it is as well to do that, because I think there's always this fear that it won't work or they're going to fail, and all of these things that get laid in on top of it, where ultimately there is never really any failure. There's just like kind of working out how you're going to get from A to B, and all the things that don't work are just the things that don't work. That's all. It doesn't mean the
Absolutely.
failure is the stopping and you going, no, it's not for me, and walking away. That's failure. And if I personally couldn't live with the shadow of not doing. I have this shadow of not doing all the time, of like, have I done this, have I done that? But that's just on like mini tasks that need to be done during the course of the week. So to have something overbearing like my life, trying to create a life where I'm feeling joy from it at every moment, for the sake of going into a situation that like I said, stripped me of everything that's good about my personality, and brought out a side to me that was just not nice, and me recognizing that was not nice, and then just kind of like falling into, for me, the way that it showed itself up was like going to work, just being really frustrated about being there, being really bored about everyone's conversations and their stuff and the usual things, being sarcastic, being passive aggressive, being like, like all of the things that are just not a good thing. But then also like kind of kicking myself for not taking the leap, and I luckily I just didn't spend too long in that, but I could see how people have spent too long in a situation that is just like wearing the life force out of them. And then they start to get one of the things I'd notice is like if there were long-term employees that were kind of stuck there and had got into a point of fear about leaving, then got very territorial about the workspace and everything within that company, even though they hated it, so would complain about everything, complain about everyone, but yet we're deeply unhappy, and that kind of like ripples out into the world. If we've got the majority of people who are in a work situation where they're spending the higher percentage of their life unhappy and unfulfilled, that kind of maybe sheds a light on where society is. If most people are just spending the majority of their lives in a place where they feel downtrodden, unseen, unhappy, purposeless, and are just doing it for the money, and just phoning it in as well. I think when you're working in something that you don't really want to do, you'll do just about enough not to get fired. You're not going to go in and come with all of the things. And especially if you're in a situation where, like you've done, where your creativity and your ideas aren't seen. So then you put all of your work and your energy into something, and then it just gets fed back with like nothing. If not, if you're on the upside of it, nothing. At worst, someone taking all of your stuff and passing it off as their own, and because that also happens as well, is then it diminishes your own feeling of self-worth about are my ideas worth anything, because people have treated it like that. And it's finding the fact that you're the one who qualifies your own work, and when you qualify it in yourself and believe in it yourself, then you put it out into the world that way. And the people who see it will see it, and the ones that don't get it, they just won't. But it's a total about face on mindset from employee to entrepreneur. So like when you made that shift, what were the first things that you were saying that you could feel that you were having to do, like a real 180, as it were, or 360, whichever way you want to do it, in terms of like mindset and the way that you had to literally turn everything on its head to then come out of employee into, I'm going to create something. I've been through experiences. What I'm seeing is worth it and is valuable to somebody out there, especially when you're starting and you don't have one client or customer yet,
Right. So fortunately for me, in my role, I had been labeled an entrepreneur. So I had been labeled as someone that could come into a department and have tough conversations, could come in a department, have a goal setting process, could come in a department, do strategic planning. And so I had been asked to do that throughout the organization. And so when one of my colleagues pointed that out to me, I thought, oh, that is right. I have been being asked to do all of these things. And the thought that if I'm already doing that work here, then I could probably do that for other folks too. And then slowly that happened just organically. I was being asked in the community outside of my organization to come in and do these things, even before I had the business. So that helped me recognize that skill set that was being recognized by others and helped me see it in myself as something that I could give. And then the other really motivating thing for me for the business was the fact that I felt that it was essential for me to put this out into the world to help so that no one else would have to go through what I went through. And that was my motivation. And when you have such a strong vision and motivation, like you said, I don't believe that there were any failures along the way to building this. I learned a lot of lessons and things that I'm not going to do again, but I don't consider them failures. I consider them pathways to where I am today. And I think that's what an entrepreneurial spirit is. Essentially, it is someone that has the ability to take on risk because it is risky, and their ability to navigate the systems around them in order to reach a goal and to be flexible and adaptable in what that looks like. My overall goal with Empower Possible and any project that I'm involved in is to look at things through self-awareness, through social networks, and through systems. And how I do that is going to change based off of who I'm talking to and who I'm working with, but that's the overall vision. And I don't want to ever lose sight of that, but that's going to change and evolve. So not being so rigid in your approach is really what's going to make you successful in that entrepreneurial mindset, is being open knowing that you're going to have challenges and setbacks and being able to adapt to that.
Mm, mm. And how would you as well pass like some guidance or some experience of then putting yourself out there, then putting a price on your time and being able to then make sure that that's met and that's recognized from others, you know, that confidence? Because I know that sometimes as well, trying to help friends and family and do favors, you know, isn't really going to get you anywhere, even though you really want to do it. It's, you know, I've made mistakes time and time again because I just want to help, but sometimes, you know, you want to help and you don't recognize your own level of expertise and the fact that someone's getting you for cut price. You know, speaking from bitter experience.
Yeah. Yeah. Money mindset. The money mindset is huge. And to break through that, my suggestion is to get guidance either from a business advisor, a coach, like you do your coaching, work with a coach, work with someone that can help you break through that, because that is essential. And to your point, yes, that money mindset, it's really hard, especially for women. For women, it is really hard. A lot of us, I'm not a parent, but think about the free labor of parenting. I mean, that it's unpaid labor that
Mhm.
many women and men, there are a lot of men caregivers out there too. That role is free labor. So that's in your mind. When you enter into certain things is that expectation of giving for free, and that can be really challenging. So that would be my biggest advice is one, notice that if you are in a business, that means then you charge for your goods. If you're not charging for your goods, then it's probably a hobby, which is wonderful, but then that's a hobby, that's not a business. Once you start trying to earn money, that's a business, and to grow as a business, it's going to be essential for you to charge for your services. And what I always like to think about, because I do find this challenging too, it is an awkward conversation to have when someone goes into and then you mention, well, let's talk about budgets, and then you can just see on their face like, oh, you were expecting for me to do this for free.
Mm,
Okay, that's
mm,
interesting assumption to be making. Um, so then that can be very awkward. But what I like to try to remember in those awkward moments is by me charging what I'm worth, one, I'm setting an example for other people that it is important to show people how to treat you. I'm showing them how I would like to be treated. And two, by charging, it's going to be enabling me to move this dream forward. I'm going to be able to help more people, and this is going to become sustainable because I'm showing up and I am asking for what I am worth. And if I continue to do that, it's going to prevent me from feeling taken advantage of. It's going to prevent me from feeling burnt out. It's going to prevent me from having to stop because I'm having more debts than income. So
mm.
it's a good reminder to set up that money mindset in a very positive way. And a lot of times that takes the help of someone outside of yourself to be able to reveal what that looks like.
Got it, got it, got it. And you mentioned, you know, working around the pandemic. Did you notice a shift in terms of people's mindset about work as we were coming out of that, and how did that impact, and how did your work, and how were you guiding and facilitating people making that transition and making that shift?
Yeah, absolutely. So you may remember the term the Great Resignation
Mm.
that happened during the pandemic, the Great Resignation. I was a part of the Great Resignation. I resigned in that couple of year period. And then Um, so a lot of people were focused on finding more meaningful work or jobs that they thought would be better. But then you kind of had the backlash a little bit of they left their employment, but the grass wasn't always greener. And
Mm.
so what I would say, if you are going to take a leap, do a values exercise and reflect on it. Have those moments of pause. Look at the values, look at where you're going into, seeing if there's a match. Maybe it's remote life that you're interested in. And that's really important to you. But then think about what your actual life would look like if you're remote calling in from a room by yourself 24 hours a day. Some people thrive in that, most people don't. So it's about being realistic about what that life could look like, and then do a visualization exercise, pretending that you're in that situation and play it out and say, does this match up with my values? Does this match up with things I like to do? So, it's an investment of your time, but it's well worth it,
Mm.
because you don't want to be in that situation where you're having to then navigate another employment switch when you just got there. So do some work on the front end to help really navigate those waters and transition.
Yeah, like it is sometimes sitting on the same chair, looking at the same laptop for hours on end.
Right. Exactly. Yes.
So if you're
Yes.
all right with that, or just get to know have like a few kind of destination coffee shops that you can go to as well, because I've
Right.
got lots of little coffee shop cards as well, so that I fill up periodically and
Right.
get a free one.
That's great. Yes.
Just kind of build that up as well, but wouldn't change it for the world,
Yes.
because
To
time.
stimulate the small business coffee shop economy, us,
Yeah,
us
yeah, exactly. So
remote
I
workers.
get to know them really well, who's got the best Wi-Fi, who's got the best cappuccino. So moving forward, like we're recording this at the end of 2023, and this probably won't be aired until the new year, but like what visions do you have for what you're creating for yourself, and then just for people in general when it comes to like working and being in their purpose, whatever that means for them?
I do a vision board exercise where I think about not only what I want to do, but how I want to feel. How do I want to feel in the new year? And then what sort of activities would lead to that? So for me, I have some guiding values that I aspire to. So meaningful work is important to me. Joyful success is important to me, and to be growth oriented. So those three things are pretty consistent throughout my life. And I relook at those and see if it still fits, but it is very consistent, at least in the past few years, that those things are something that I aspire to have. And then I think about what does that look like in actuality? What's that realization? So that visualization process happens. And what does that realization process look like? So for me, I want to do more in-person events. I want to host retreats and workshops, and I want to collaborate with people that have similar missions as I do. Want to help build a place, a sanctuary for rest and recovery, so that you can have those sacred moments of pause, because it's really challenging to build those in. But once you get into the habit of it, it will become second nature. But you have to break from your current habits and rebuild them in order for it to occur. So if you're looking into visioning, which you don't wait till the new year, you can do it at any moment, at any time. Really think about what are the feelings that you want to be having throughout, and then what activities in your life have led to those feelings, and how can you duplicate that? And I really do believe that most of us will feel called to do meaningful and purposeful actions. That's how we find fulfillment in life. So it will naturally happen.
Yeah, definitely what we need to do. And I think more people are realizing that now, that it's not just a drunken resolution that you make at the end of the new year. For the new year, you really kind of really dig into exactly what it means and what needs to shift, and you feel way more prepared for it to come up as
Yeah.
well. So
And I think there's a changing in generational. You asked about the change of work. I
mm,
do think there was this expectation, at least in the United States, that you went to college or went to some technical school, you worked for 50 years, you retired.
mm,
And it didn't really matter if you were happy. It didn't really matter if you were fulfilled. That was the expectation. You didn't change your job because you were unhappy. It was like work isn't supposed to make you happy. You're just supposed to do it.
mm,
That was kind of the attitude. And now, thank goodness, it's changing, and you can have joy at work. That is not only possible, it should be expected. So that's a mindset shift, I think, in the generations. Now, is it going to be joyful all the time? No.
Mm.
And it shouldn't be joyless all of the time.
Great, great. I love that. Thank you so much for sharing all your wisdom with me today as well. Can you just let everybody know where they can connect with you, and also just speak more about that program that you mentioned, the free program?
Yeah, thank you so much. So I do have a website, empowerpossible.com. And you can go to the website, and that Career Crossroads online course is one of the tabs on the website. So you can click on that. And then also, if you are navigating changes, there is a workbook that's called Navigating Your Career Transitions. And what that is it's going to have exercises throughout the workbook to help bring clarity to your career path and journey. It helps identify strengths, and it helps you think about what different interests can be aligned with certain areas. And so, how to integrate them into your career. So, a lot of the things that we were talking about today, it
Mm,
can be found in that reflection workbook.
mm.
I'm also on LinkedIn, Julie Zaruba Fountain, and then on Facebook and Instagram at Empower Possible. So please connect with me. I'd love to hear from you. If you download the word book, I'd love to hear your thoughts, and want to wish you well in all of your career journeys and life journeys too.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Julie.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Julie, for sharing with me, and thank you for listening. You can find out more about me on my website. That's carolmaywhittick.com, CarolMaywhittick.com. On Facebook and on LinkedIn, connect with me under Carol May Whittick, and on Instagram, I'm Casmic, CAZMICK. Additional links are in the show notes. Until next week, take care. Bye.